In this video, I'd like to explain the TED assignment in a little more depth. This is a type of writing you may not have encountered before in quite this way, but it's good practice for the kinds of papers you'll write later in this class and in other college classes. First, if you consult the assignment sheet, you'll see that you're supposed to write a summary and an analysis. In the summary section, you're basically giving someone who's not seen the talk a good idea what the main points of the talk were and a general flow of the progression of the argument. You don't need to give every example or event that the speaker brought up, and it's usually best to start this part of the paper by breaking the talk down into sections and talk about the main point of each section and how the speaker makes that point. Creating an outline of the main points can help you write that first part of the paper. After the summary part of your paper, you turn to analysis, and here's where the questions on your assignment sheet can really help you. You can do things like examples that are used or audience choices or interesting points or ideas, and you can evaluate a little bit. The place I'm talking about on your assignment sheet is basically these questions here. And then you can also respond to the paper and tell what you find most interesting or convincing. What you're not doing, though, is writing a paper on the same topic as your TED Talk, but giving new or further examples from your experience or from other sources. Keep the focus on this one source and make sure you summarize and paraphrase it often. Also, make sure you include at least one direct quotation or verbatim text from the talk in your paper. So now, how do you start the paper? Well, basically you need to start with an opening that lets the reader know that this is a summary and analysis of a particular TED Talk. So here's an example. In the TED Talk, The Power of Believing That You Can Improve, Carol Dweck argues that not only is a growth mindset more beneficial to students than a fixed one, but that use of a growth mindset leads to an increase in equality in society. Now, in the introduction for this paper, you would go on to describe each of the sections of the talk and what each one does. Dweck in hers, for instance, gives some definitions to explain what she means by what she calls the power of yet, which is over here. She explains how she arrived at these conclusions through some research that she conducted early in her career. She then gives some ways that teachers and parents could use her ideas in real life. And after that, she gives some examples of classrooms that have applied her ideas and had great success. She concludes by linking the use of her ideas to an increase in equality in society. At the end of the introduction, you can give a thesis of your own, and it might look something more like this. Dweck's choices of specific research study classroom examples make her talk extremely effective for an audience of educators and parents. So that's the kind of thing that I'm going to be proving by summarizing and then analyzing the talk. Now, the rest of your paper is going to be going into more depth to describe and explain each section of the talk and then to analyze it. In the course of the summary analysis, you're also going to need to cite the talk, whether you're summarizing or paraphrasing it in your own words, or whether you're using verbatim text from the talk. Let's talk a little bit about how all that works. You're going to need to make sure, first of all, that you include a works cited page on the last page of your paper. Notice there's only one work here, so there's no S for works cited. It's just the title up there. And then this is the way that you break it down. And this is also on your assignment sheet on your paper. And be aware that if you fail to follow this template, it will lead to points off on the final paper. Now, you also need to make sure that you give credit to your source within the body of the paper. And that might look something like this. Dweck observes that not yet also gave me insight into a critical event early in my career, 0:43. What is all that about? Well, basically, because this is a TED Talk, we're using the timestamp, where we might in a book use a page number, and so that's going to be in parentheses. So if someone wants to go back and look at the talk itself and find this particular verbatim text, they can find it right here. If I scroll down a little bit, you can see that's exactly where it came from. The 0:43 is here on the interactive transcript, and there it is. Now, here's some rules for citing sources in general. Basically, for the first mention, you're going to use the full name, so Carol Dweck in my case. After that, you're just going to use the last name only. You're never going to use the source's first name because that person is not your personal friend. You're then going to use some verb of saying, which will create what we call an attributive tag or signal phrase. The other way that you can cite it is you can give the quote and then put the source's name in parentheses at the end. Those are your two choices. For an attributive tag, we basically have another one here. Dweck observes that when students are taught using a growth mindset, it leads to impressive academic gains. Quote, the native kids outdo the Microsoft kids, end quote. And then you see that comes from 634 on the transcript. And if I take you to the transcript here and I scroll down to 634, you can see that right down here at the bottom of this paragraph, that's where she says that. Now notice I've got some square brackets here. That's because I've changed the tense of that verb to make it match with the rest of my paper to keep it correct. Now again, these are called signal phrases, and they're the author's name and some verb of saying, and then the quoted or paraphrased material. And you use this especially in a research paper, when the source of the information really matters to the discussion. And in TED Talk, it's always going to matter because that's all you're analyzing. And you can use the parenthetical citation for the page numbers or for timestamps if they exist. For parenthetical citation, where you're citing the person in parentheses as well, here's an example of that. We've got the quotation here, and then we have Dweck, and then a space, and then 4:08. So you use the quoted or paraphrased material, and then in parentheses you've got the last name, a space, and then a timestamp or page number if they exist. You choose to use this one when the material source is not as important or relevant to the discussion at hand, or when you're using a lot of sources, like in a research paper, in close proximity, and you want to keep the focus on those ideas and not so much where they came from. Where they came from can add ethos or credibility to your writing if you want to talk about, like in this case with Carol Dweck, she's been a researcher for a long time, and so telling the audience that before you start giving examples from her work is going to add some credibility to your writing. Now, the other thing to think about is when you have long quotes, you format them in a certain way, and when you have shorter quotes, you format them in a different way. If you have over 4 lines, you use what's called inset or block quote format, and you don't put quotation marks around it. Instead, you indent it over. And if you use 4 lines or fewer, you're going to use the quotation marks around them. Let me show you a couple of those. In either case, you need to make sure that you talk about the quote and you don't let it speak for you. You're also going to try to use as little of the verbatim text as you can get away with. So let me go down here, and basically here are the 2 examples. If you're using a short quote, you put it in quotation marks just like this, and then your citation is in parentheses at the end, and then the period goes after that. If you use an inset or a block quote, you're basically going to take the whole thing and inset it over. I can show you how to do this in another video, or you can get, basically any writing tutor can help you with this. You do the whole thing, and then you put a period at the end, and then the citation goes after that. Notice that the period doesn't go in the same place here that it goes when you've got a block quote. Now in either case, again, use the least amount of verbatim text you can use to make your point, and don't let it speak for you. Use it as an example or as something you want to analyze, and you can point out important ideas or keywords or phrases or significant facts. But basically, if you're going to use a really long passage, you need to say at least as much as the passage itself has said. And you need to make sure that you set it up before you use it, and then you analyze it afterwards. No drive-by quoting, in other words. And basically that is it. So if you have any questions about this, please contact your instructor, and thanks very much for watching.